Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this RPG review I'm going to be looking at Leaves of Chiaroscuro, Exploration and Intrigue in a Strange and Wondrous Renaissance. And this is a book written by Megan Bennett Burks and Jason Larder. The version I'm reviewing is a colour PDF that's 367 pages long. Megan was kind enough to send me a review copy. Thanks very much, Megan. I was lucky enough to play in a game that she hosted for BrigadeCon 2016. The PDF is available from DriveThru RPG for $10, and I'll put a link to where you can get that in the description below, where you can also see the session we played for BrigadeCon. Leaves of Chiaroscuro uses the Fate system. Okay, so how much bang do you actually get for your book with this game? Well, before the book launches into the by now all but obligatory credits, thanks and licensing information, there's a short statement of intent at the start of the book. Now, I personally love this because it tells you straight away what vibe the authors are going for, creating a fantasy world that's a little bit like our own, but rather than being stuck in the pseudo-medieval time period that we're all accustomed to from D&D and many other fantasy worlds, the world of Isaiah, and I apologise for not pronouncing that correctly, is undergoing a renaissance where innovation, magic and Machiavellian plotting are very much the order of the day. Now, this is perhaps not to everyone's taste, but personally I think it makes a refreshing change from the world of knights and kings that we're all used to. There are a few short paragraphs of a short story which seems to describe someone turning the tables in an assassination attempt. It didn't really do anything for me, to be honest, being too short to really set the scene or establish the flavour of the setting, and it did feel a bit like filler in my opinion. But as space fillers go, it's not too bad, and it didn't spoil my enjoyment of the rest of the book. When you first hit the contents page, it becomes very obvious that there's a hell of a lot of stuff in this book. Being used to the slightly looser and more broadly defined Fate World books, you can tell just by glancing through there's a lot of shit going down in this campaign world, and you're getting a lot of material for your money. Part 1 is the core rules and the setting. There's a beautiful piece of art on the chapter page showing a stylized armoured figure standing in front of the castle, whilst a wind blows through the vegetation around him. This reminded me a lot of late medieval / early Renaissance images that I've seen in books, and works very well as a visual tie-in for the mood of the book in my opinion. Although we have the armoured knight, his sword is sheathed and there's a troubled look on his face. Perhaps he's facing some foe that he can't just deal with by smacking upside the head with a blade. We're given a brief definition of the Renaissance as it applies to the game, an age of exploration, discovery and conflict. Again, I like the authors are very much telling you what they have in mind for the game. The campaign world is one of contrasting light and dark, hence the title of the book. Chiaroscuro being an artistic term for the interplay of contrasting areas of light and shadow. Reading through the book, it seems that a great deal of thought has gone into the setting and reinforcing the themes of the setting. As we move through the book, the artwork is of variable quality. Some of it is very roughly sketched, whilst other pieces are more detailed or use stock artwork. I think either of the styles could have potentially worked, but the contrast between the two styles doesn't really do the book any favours in my opinion, and is a little bit jarring. We do get a very interesting timeline of the campaign setting though, detailing the world from the Age of Legends, remembered only in myth, up to the present day. There are events in the timeline such as the Black Death that people will recognise from real world history, and it becomes clear that a lot of the inspiration has been taken from the real world to create this campaign setting. The setting is quite detailed with a number of terms that you probably won't instantly be familiar with. However, the authors have thoughtfully included a handy lexicon that, at least initially, you may want to bookmark, since you'll probably be referring to it a fair bit, at least if your memory is anywhere near as bad as mine is. The main focus of the game is on a fantasy Renaissance version of Italy, and there are write-ups of several large cities such as Bologna and Naples. Each of the write-up includes a map of the city, skillfully combining what looks like campaign cartographer style mapping with more hand-drawn scenic elements, a brief description of the city, and a couple of paragraphs highlighting specific areas of interest follow on. These are all well written with numerous potential plot hooks seeded through them, like the enchanted volcano Vesuvius that threatens Pompeii and Naples, to the strange bloodlines of the Sforza family in Milan. There does seem to be a little confusion about the time when the descriptions are applicable in this chapter. For instance, the Naples section suggests that Vesuvius threatens both it and Pompeii, whilst the Pompeii chapter seems to be written after the volcano has already erupted and the damage has already been done. It's possible these entries were written at different points of the setting's timeline, but it would have been nicer if this was made just a little bit clearer in the text. Given the importance of religion and the conflict between it and the growing innovations of science during the Renaissance in the real world, it's not surprising that religion is covered in a little detail. We get additional details on 3 religions. Christianity gets a brief mention. There's a religion called the Dragon Cult, a splintered faction of draconic creatures and those who worship them, believing that creation is a dream of the great worms, and that once they're all awakened, the world will move on to a new phase in its existence. And thirdly, the Malak religion, an offshoot of Judaism worshipped by the Nephilim Empire that has a strictly ranked hierarchy of gods and demigods. Each of the Nephilim tribes gets a core write-up, although you will probably find yourself reaching for that bookmarked lexicon page again during it. All of these write-ups are interesting. Personally, I'd have liked to have had in-game religions that gave more of a nod to those in the real world, but I can understand that perhaps the authors wanted to seek causing offence to anyone. The Italy featured in the game is a hotbed of factions and groups, all jostling for power and influence. We get single-page write-ups of a handful of these factions. My own personal favourite is the Sisterhood of the Phoenix, an order of female knights inspired by tales of a fiery bird ascending from the pyre of Joan of Arc. Despite facing persecution in some areas, the Sisterhood attempts to convert folk to their faith, whilst protecting people from unscrupulous users of evil magics. Chapter 2 covers the multiverse, and anyone who has played D&D or a number of other RPGs will be familiar with the idea of a multiverse. Effectively, the core campaign setting is a single plane or sphere nestled amidst numerous other planes or realms that each have their own inhabitants, creatures, and rules that govern them. Leaves of Chiaroscuro takes an interesting approach to this, effectively mashing a lot of mythological sources together with dashes of their own individual creations. For example, we're told that originally the planes are part of the world tree Yggdrasil, a nod to the real-world Norse mythology, but that at the end of the Age of Legends, the Malak Imperium seized the territory around the tree, seeking to remake it in their own image and storm the domain of God itself. For their arrogance, the 13 Nephilim who attempted this were never seen again, and their city of Atlantis was erased from the world, along with the Great Tree. This mixing of familiar mythology with new setting elements has to be one of my favourite things about this campaign world, and it's something you see throughout the book. I love it personally because it allows anyone who has even a basic grasp of real-world mythology, which, let's face it, is a lot of role players, to start off with a fairly good grasp of the broad strokes of the campaign world. It's then a lot easier to build on this initial base of knowledge to digest and absorb the newly created elements of the setting without having to jump in cold. I think this is a very clever move on behalf of the authors. The book goes into some detail on how spirits function within the setting. As beings of the supernal world, they cannot exist in the material realm for long without either possessing a host or anchoring themselves to a place or object. Most spirits prefer intelligent creatures as anchors, since it allows them to affect the world. Spirits can be destroyed, but as a last-ditch attempt to escape dissolution, they can make a Faustian bargain with their would-be destroyer, allowing them to avoid death as long as they perform the agreed deal. I think this is a pretty interesting wrinkle that any enterprising GM could get a lot of story mileage from. The book moves into a number of bestiary-style entries, covering some of the more bizarre creatures that inhabit the campaign setting, providing aspects, skills, and descriptions of the creatures. There's a fair variety of different monsters and creatures here, ranging from those of classic mythology to Cthulhu mythos-inspired creatures such as the Hounds of Tindalos. We're also given a whistle-stop tour of some of the strange alternate realms that make up the game's multiverse. A number of these will seem familiar to players of D&D and other plane-hopping games, since they take inspiration from familiar sources. However, despite the briefness of the entries, they are all well written and give interesting snapshots of the realm. Chapter 3 starts to get into the mechanics part of creating your characters a little more, and starts off by describing ways to make your party of characters feel more like a cohesive group. The authors have chosen to do this by having the players create two group aspects. One is the group mission, and the other is the group trouble or issue that they have to deal with. I think this is a great way of doing it, since any player in the group can tap into these aspects, and it puts down in black and white what the current group goals are, and perhaps who their greatest enemy or foe is. So it serves as a handy reminder, especially if you're picking up your campaign again after a break. Several examples of groups are provided to illustrate how you can use the aspects to theme your group around exploration, or perhaps you prefer more mercenary exploits, or any of the other examples listed. The rules for creating individual characters follow, and these are pretty much the standard Fate core rules with a few tweaks. I'm not going to get into details of the Fate core rules here. If you want to check them out, just do a quick search for the Fate system reference document online. A couple of tweaks to the rules are that non-mundane humans pick a single skill that can become glamoured when they succeed on a roll in style, effectively allowing some minor supernatural effects to occur in addition to the success. It's a cool way of giving the players implicit permission to embroider their descriptions, although a few more examples of this would have been nice. In addition to humans, there are 5 species of Kalati, or hidden ones, available to play, and these are Lacerta, who are draconic shapeshifters, Therion, who are chimeric beastmen, Nephilim, descendants of the angelic Grigori, Aphiron, a species of near-humans born of alchemical experiments, and Cambions, who are your sort of tiefling scions of demonic bloodlines. Each player gets to pick a free stunt from a list of options provided for their species. This is a cool way of setting them apart without adding in lots of mechanical elements, bonuses and restrictions, in my opinion. The species are all very interesting and have fairly extensive write-ups. Because each has a list of options as well, rather than just a single set, you can still get a fair amount of variety, even if you had all your players portraying characters of the same species. Chapter 4 covers equipment and wealth. Now, one of the criticisms I often hear levelled against Fate games is that equipment is handled in a very woolly, abstract manner, simply as aspects or stunts. Now, personally, I don't mind this, but Leaves of Chiaroscuro uses the optional weapon and armour rating rules from Fate Core, adding a little more granularity to their equipment. This is certain to please people who enjoy knowing exactly what kind of sword they have and exactly how efficient their armour is. Now, as a Renaissance game, black powder firearms also make an appearance, using additional stunt-like traits to model some of the problems and issues inherent in using this type of weapon. Although these additional traits do add a little bit of additional complexity in bookkeeping, it's nothing too heavy duty, and I think it's a nice compromise between speed and crunch. Money in the game is a little more abstracted, with characters using a wealth point stress track to mark how much money they have. When they make a roll to purchase something, a player may voluntarily take a wealth stress to add to this roll, recovering it when additional money is gained. Chapter 5 covers thaumaturgic magic, and magic is a fairly detailed subsystem in this game, but in essence you purchase a path of magery for your character as a stunt. This and your level in the Magicka skill gain you a number of car points. In order to cast a spell, you spend a point of car and make a Magicka roll. Spells can effectively perform one of the existing 4 Fate core actions. For example, you could make an attack action using a spell, or they can create effects equivalent to a stunt on the fly, keeping things nicely within the current boundaries of the system, but allowing mages a great deal of versatility. Mages in the game operate under a series of mystical oaths that define their magic. Those who break their oaths more than a few times become a warlock, a twisted creature of powerful and dark magic, who alters and warps the very environment by their mere presence. The chapter goes on to expand the basic outline of the magic system. There are a lot of additional details that players can get into if they want. The chapter covers everything from using blood sacrifice and living card to power spells to the uppermost limits of thaumaturgy. Numerous example scenarios are provided throughout this chapter, covering common magic scenarios such as summoning creatures, and these are all very useful and help explain how a player can get the most enjoyment out of the magic system. Part 2 of the book is titled The Red City, and it's sort of a part setting expansion and part adventure, detailing the papacy's attempt to cement further their control over the city-state of Bologna. The section begins by providing a number of potential plot seeds for each of the different factions in Bologna. There is also a cool link to a Google map where several potential adventure locations have been tagged. This is a nice extra for those GMs who want to dig a little more into the real world equivalent of Bologna and see how it matches up to the fictional game version. The section then moves into more standard gazetteer territory, detailing places and points of interest, along with providing a smattering of interesting NPCs. This section of the book is very interesting and superbly written, containing just enough information to give you a flavour of the City of Towers without bombarding you with too much to take in. I don't want to go into it in exhaustive detail since I think it would spoil the surprises for people who play in the setting, but as a campaign setting, I think it's extremely compelling, a little bit unusual, and well crafted. The book wraps up with a nice, clean character sheet. It's no major shakes in the graphics department, but it is clear and functional, just what you need a character sheet to be. And then finally, we have a series of appendices covering a nice bunch of extras such as pronunciation guides and common names for characters, all of which will be very useful during a campaign. So, in conclusion, I think that Leaves of Chiaroscuro has managed to strike that sometimes difficult balance of additional rules and crunch whilst maintaining the quick-flowing action pace of Fate Core. I'm always a little concerned when I see a massively thick Fate book that the authors are just going to have heaped on masses of subsystems without giving a lot of thought to how that will affect the speed or the character of the game. I'm pleased to say that this is not the case with the Leaves of Chiaroscuro. While some additional systems have been added, mainly equipment and magic, the author seems to have taken great care to only add what is needed, avoiding bloating the system up to unnecessary levels. The additions that they have made are interesting and well thought out, making the setting its own animal without completely losing the elegant simplicity of the Fate system. The PDF is beautifully produced, although, as I said earlier, the artwork is of something of variable quality. The layout of the book, however, is clean and crisp, looking beautiful without interfering with ease of reading the text. The setting is extremely interesting, seeming at once familiar and new at the same time, something that is not easy to do, but that allows you to jump straight in, even if you've not fully immersed yourself in the lore of the setting, but rewarding you when you do finally take that plunge. If you're looking for a quirky fantasy system that is something a little different from the pseudo-medieval worlds that we're used to, or you want a really interesting take on a magic system and species for Fate, then I highly recommend that you pick up this PDF. You get an awful lot of material for your $10, a very compelling setting, and lots of well-written material that could easily be ported into other Fate games should you so wish. So I hope if you've enjoyed this video, you'll consider clicking on the red dice up there to subscribe to my channel. If you have any comments, please put them in the comments box down below. Or as always, hit me up in the social links. I really do enjoy reading what you write. So until I see you next time, take care and happy gaming.